Okay guys, so now we're going to learn about exceptions in Java. So let's just create a new project to start with. We'll call it exceptions. Can't type. Okay, we've got our code window here. Right, so let's get to the point. So an exception, what is an exception? In simple terms, an exception in Java is an event that disrupts the normal flow of a program. And this can typically be due to an error within our code or an error that has come about from, example, a user input that's happened in our code. So an exception is basically just an error, but we need to be able to handle the exception, right? So exceptions are always going to happen, but we need to be handling them, right? So exceptions should be handled. And what this does is it creates what we call fault tolerance, which is obviously tolerating faults and planning for the unexpected. And this is crucial for building a stable application and having robust code. And this is a very good feature in Java. So let's just write some code and you'll see what I mean. So let's just get rid of some code in here, flesh this out a little bit, add some spacing. Cool. So let's think of a bit of code that can produce an error. So what jumps to mind for me is, let's say we had an array of integers, not a list, but an array. Let's say numbers equals, and then we'll initialize a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we've got 9 elements in this list. And let's just say we want to system out print the first element of the list, so that'll be numbers at 0. Let's run that. Hopefully, we will get what we expect, which is 1. But let's say we went for index 8, right? Which is going to be this element, the final element. So hopefully we will get 9. Now that's all well and good, but what if we went like index 100, right? There's not 100 values in here. There's not 99 values in here. So where is it going to get the 100th index value from? Which will be the 99th number. As you can see, that throws an error, which is what we call an exception. So it says exception in thread main, and we see this bit here. Array index out of bounds exception. Index 100 out of bounds for length 9. Which is an obvious error, right? We don't want to be doing that, but how would we go about handling this? Obviously, this is a hard-coded error that we've created on purpose, but this might happen accidentally if this number here is a variable, and maybe we don't have control over what this number is. So how do we go about handling that? Well, this is where exceptions come in, and handling exceptions, and specifically, we handle exceptions using the try-catch syntax. So here's what we do. We write try, space, and then curly bracket. And then anything in here is what could produce an exception. So we're going to try and do this, right? That could possibly produce an exception. Which, obviously, this might produce an exception depending on the amount of elements that's in here. So let's just move this and put it within this try bit here. So this is basically saying we're going to try and do this. It might work out, it might not. In this case, it didn't work out, but if there was 101 elements, it would work out. But then what we want to do is we want to go below it, catch And then we want to type this exception here, the name of the exception. So we want to go array index out of bounds exception. And then we can give that a name. We can call that EX or E or whatever in the brackets. And then we want a space curly bracket. And here is where we handle that exception. So in theory, we could just do nothing to handle it if we didn't care. Now, anything that goes in here, this code will be fired off if an exception is thrown here, which it is in this case. So just so we can see how that happens, let's go system out print exception call. Like this. Now let's run this again and see what happens. And here we go. We just get an output string with an exit code of 0, which means everything happened fine, there was no exceptions, because it's been caught. Now, obviously there was an exception that happened here, but because we've handled it in the appropriate way, it's not going to completely bring the program to a halt. Now, we have this specific exception here, which is array index out of bounds exception. But what if we wanted to apply this to any sort of exception, right? There's many different exceptions out there. So we can actually just replace this with just an exception, right? So we go exception. And this will allow us to catch any exception. So whether it's an array out of bounds or it's a file not found or anything like that, they all have names and you can look those up for the different types of errors that could happen. This covers all of the different exceptions. So if we press run here, as we can see, it works the exact same way. But we could do anything in here, any sort of thing, whether it's related to an array or not. We could do it in here and it will get caught if there was an error in here. Now, for example, if we wanted to make this work again and go like numbers at 1, which would give us 2, and as you can see, it will do as it intended to do and it won't have to catch the exception because there was no error here. And obviously we can have multiple lines here, right? We could have many lines here, and any of these, the second there is an exception, we go to the catch block and it gets gracefully handled here. Now Java is assuming that we're handling this exception properly. For now we're just printing something out, but we could execute any bit of code in here and it would work as we want. So exception handling is almost like having a first aid kit, right? If you stumble and get a minor injury, which we stumble here and get sort of an injury in this sort of analogy, the catch block, which is this, can sort of help us manage the situation and continue on instead of having to end, abruptly, right? That's kind of my simple real world analogy for that. But this is the basics of exceptions. Now, we've only really scratched the surface here, but this is just a good introduction to get you thinking about error handling and things like fault tolerance. Hopefully you guys understood that. Please do ask any questions down below in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.